Ah, bonjour Laurent.
Hi Denise, je vais vous présenter en français. Donc vous êtes chercheur, universitaire, vous êtes professeur, présidente du conseil académique du centre de management fondé sur les données probantes, c'est-à-dire sur des preuves. Vous formez des cadres. Vous êtes co-auteur avec Eric Barens d'un ouvrage intitulé Le management fondé sur des preuves. Vous avez remporté à 2 reprises le prix Georges Terry qui récompense le meilleur livre de management. Vous avez reçu de très nombreuses récompenses. Depuis plus de 25 ans, vous vous intéressez au management basé sur des preuves, au bien-être des travailleurs et aux pratiques organisationnelles positives. Pour ma part, je suis un professionnel de terrain qui a entendu les témoignages de milliers de travailleurs. Et ma première question: how do you explain the important place that the irrationality of decision taken in organization still occupies? Donc, en français, comment expliquez-vous la place qu'occupe encore l'irrationalité dans les décisions prises dans les organisations?
Yeah. Well, it's a very profound question. It is the human condition to be what we say boundedly rational, rational with limits. And indeed, if we were to interview, the millions of people on the planet, they would say, "Oh, I'm rational. See how I make my decisions." But rationality is an independent perspective of the person's point of view. People will think they're rational because it means I'm pursuing my goals like the best way I know how. But the fact of the matter is, we all have such cognitive limitations. We're far from anything like a perfect computer. We can only take so much information in at one time. We very often don't take in information. We pull ideas and solutions out of our memory, out of our heads. And rationality is a sort of standard by saying, if you had available to you all the information related to your purpose for making the decision or the goals you have and you'd like to achieve, you would actually use different information combined in ways very dissimilar to how you made your decision. So it's a standard external to the person. People think they're rational, but it's almost impossible without a lot of tools and support to meet the standard of rationality that a researcher or somebody who looks independently at the situation would apply.
Okay, so people think they are rational. And my second question, you work on the concept of the psychological contract.
Yes.
The psychological contract can be defined as the belief system according to which we know what other and we ourselves should and should not do. What are the link between the psychological contract and employee well-being?
Oh, that's a
Donc en
love.
français, vous avez travaillé sur le concept de contrat psychologique. Le contrat psychologique peut être défini comme le système de croyances selon lequel on sait ce que les autres et nous-mêmes devons faire et ne pas faire. Quel lien faites-vous entre le contrat psychologique et le bien-être des travailleurs?
Well, I would say first and foremost, if in the employment relationship, the psychological contract were kept, people would enjoy well-being. To have a fulfilled psychological contract benefits the person, but that's for a very basic reason. People develop an understanding of what they owe their employer and what they should provide in return, from the employer would provide in return, from their own goal seeking. I join the organization, I join my university, I know what I want, I try to figure out what they want from me. And in the course, I develop an understanding of what I can expect from them, what I have to give in return that aligns with my goals and purpose for being in the organization. The issue is, once a contract, mental contract, a psychological contract is formed, people do not update it easily. However, employers, after they onboard a person and have worked with them for a while, may indeed make changes in the commitments they're willing to fulfill, what they're willing to offer. But employees, first, they don't necessarily make much effort to explain to the employees what and why the change. But employees are relatively slow to update because they're still relying on the initial contract that they formed, their initial set of beliefs in the exchange between themselves and the employer. I partly attribute this to poor implementation on the part of the organization. Management makes changes, thinks they've communicated to their workers, but do so quickly, incompletely, ineffectively. And employees, seeing this confused message from their company, fall back on their existing beliefs. And that's where contract violation often occurs. An organization can make commitments to people that are kept for a while, that people come to rely on, and then stumble, and then move the manager the person had to a new job. And new managers are one of the reasons why people often perceive that their psychological contract has failed to be kept, because the new manager doesn't hold the same beliefs or the same exchange with his or her staff that the initial manager had. So changes in bosses, changes in company policies and practices are sources of discrepancies between what the person believes is the relationship and what the employer acts as if it is. And I think you have to understand that one of the ways in which organizations function well is when employees have a good understanding of what they need to do and what the company wants from them and what will come in return. Organizations reap tremendous benefits from having stable understandings between the leadership and the employees. But I think in this age of change and the more salient goals of finance and the market, it seems reasonable to the management to make quick changes without thinking about the ripple effects down to their employees. Because employees do not make rapid changes in their understanding of the psychological contract. They can change through a process, but many organizations fail to engage in that level of education and support and many sources of information that would come to help a person revise their beliefs. Employees are smart. They don't create psychological contracts that have no chance of being met. I haven't seen that yet, but employees are also slow to adapt because they're relying on this initial set of beliefs, something that management fails often to appreciate.
So what influences the psychological contract created by workers?
Okay. First and foremost, nobody commits to a psychological contract that is not in their own interest. So I would have you think about the psychological contract as part of a goal process. I take a job at a university, I join a company because I have certain goals and interests. So partly I'm there because I think my goals can be met here. Employers then make offers. They say, well, here's after this first job, these are the things that are likely to happen. Or people look around to their friends and their coworkers and they see the consequences for the coworkers of the ways in which they behaved and act. And people interpret that as part of their own understanding. Well, if it worked for Laurent, it'll work for Denise, and form beliefs based on social information. Because people are smart. They don't want to misinterpret the situation. Remember, they want their goals to be met. But we're all, both the company and the employee, we're all skewed into our own interests. Employee wants his or her goals met, hopefully in a way that benefits the organization because they're trying to keep it going. Employers make commitments they think will benefit them, but employers change their commitments much more quickly than employees do. And so there is a lag that many employers really fail to think through. And you always have to go back if you're an employer and say, what are the goals of my employees? What are they seeking? Is it security? Is it advancement? Is it stability? Is it opportunity? And in effect, if you're trying to change a psychological contract, you want to express it in terms employees can understand. And often the terms are expressed only in terms that make sense to the market or to the employer and not the interests of employees. But just like in any negotiation, you think about the interests of each other. And my basic finding in many years of research on the psychological contract is they can change, but it's necessary for the employer to have a very good idea of what it can honestly offer its workers and support making that offer valuable to the people if you want to keep the workforce you have. Because over time, people will change if they feel well treated, if they feel heard. Because again, it's all about the goals I'm pursuing. So how can I pursue my goals in this new iteration of the organization? You have to think about it that way as an employer. But many employers only think about their own goals, and that really is a breakdown of a psychological contract. That's almost a guarantee that there will be violation. And violation is costly. People react emotionally. They can slack on the job. They may engage in sabotage. If they have alternative, they may well leave. And they may be more difficult to build trust and support in future. And we should never underestimate the value to the organization and to the person of a relationship between worker and organization that is at peace, that is something that can be relied on, as opposed to where you need to be vigilant and careful because trust is broken down.
Thank you. In your opinion, Denise, the impact of a renegotiation of the psychological contract on the hierarchical relationship at work. Selon vous, quel est l'impact de la renégociation du contrat psychologique sur les relations hiérarchiques au travail?
Well, renegotiation is a normal part of any exchange relationship that lasts over time. I often, when I have a class of executives, I will ask them, well, how many of you have been married longer than 10 years? And sometimes if they're older, I say 30, but 10 years. How long have you been married? Any of you over 10 years? Most of the people will raise their hand. And then I say, well, how many of you have the same contract with your spouse that you had when you started when you were first wed? The hands come down. And I say, what changed? Well, we had kids. I moved for his job. He moved for my job. I went back to school. Many things that happened. So people are aware when they're in a relationship of any standing that the things you rely on and you expect from each other, even the very explicit terms of what you've agreed to, change. So renegotiation in long-standing interactions, pretty common. If it's true in marriage, it's going to be true in employment, I'm pretty willing to bet. But the issue in a renegotiation is not I put a gun to your head and I say, you got to do this because the market has changed. That's not a renegotiation. That's a shotgun wedding. That is not what we are talking about. Renegotiation means I make clear to you what it is that I need, and you make clear to me what it is you need, and we work to find a stable ground. But for many employers, it's very one-sided. It's a here's what I can offer you. I think that's very foolish to be one-sided as an employer or as an HR department because the people were voluntarily participating and helping you and collaborating before the renegotiation. Why wouldn't you expect to have voluntary participation and collaboration after if the renegotiation is successful? It may be, I have to always be careful because countries differ. Like in the Netherlands, there's much more a sense of working collaboratively between labor and management. I think in Germany, because of the very different labor laws there and the active role of works councils and whatnot, the nature of the renegotiation is much more explicit and it is truly two-sided. In the United States, it's much less so because we have such a strong focus on the market and employers take less time to think about internally how do we work with the workforce we have that have already got talent and knowledge. They tend to make an offer without creating a platform for reconfiguring the relationship. So I want to give you an illustration of how it is that a renegotiation can be formed. So one of the things I've done work on is something called the idiosyncratic deal. That's when an individual employee negotiates with their manager or HR to get something different than is the standard. Maybe it's because they need to work remotely, or maybe it's because they're in school and there's other things that they want to be able to do while they are working, or they want to leave for such a purpose. If a worker is valued by their manager or by the organization, it's easy to get a deal because you want to keep a valuable person. I have observed that what people are willing to give to a highly valuable worker can be the basis of new policy for workers broadly. And all companies have run these little experiments. I have French colleagues, I always ask them, have you ever had an idiosyncratic deal in your company? And they laugh and they say, well, don't tell anybody. But when I worked for the government, I got this. When I worked in a finance company, I had that. So I know France is teeming with idiosyncratic deals, but you guys don't talk about it. Americans probably talk about it more because we all kind of figure if they got it, we can get it. Employers already offer very worker-oriented deals to the people they value. My suggestion is pay attention to those deals, share that information, talk with HR, talk with managers who have kept highly valuable people, and find out what the offers have been. Because then you have a basis for understanding what workers more broadly would want and value. And then you can have a real conversation with workers more broadly. I think all organizations know how to renegotiate, but they don't know how to do it en masse. They know how to do it one by one by one. But you got to remember, even Noah didn't take creatures one by one by one. He took them in twos. And there's real value in making these, in a renegotiation process, putting it on a more collective footing to be able to, when you're asking people for new and different contributions, to make an offer that makes it attractive to them. And two things that are attractive to people, one is developmental opportunities, and the other is more pay. Many people will give up pay for development, and many people just want the money. But those two features, development and making my job more interesting, and expectation of good compensation now or in the future, really valuable. In this way, if you offer these things, you're keeping workers who you already know are productive because these are the deals you offer to people you already employ. So they're known to you what they can contribute. And that's so different than bringing people in from the marketplace who you have a sense of how they could contribute, but you haven't seen them work in your organization or how productive they can be. So I'm encouraging organizations that need to renegotiate because old performance expectations no longer apply or new demands need to be fulfilled to broaden their offers and use frontline managers to identify what it is that people find attractive and feed that information into your HR policies and practices.
Renegotiation supposed to clarify our needs and share information.
Both sides, both sides.
Both sides, yes. What change you seen in organization that practice evidence-based management?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that
En
question.
French, quelle évolution constatez-vous dans les organisations qui pratiquent le management fondé sur les preuves?
So one of the features of evidence-based,
Excuse me, maybe clarified what evidence-based management is.
yeah, thank you for that, Laurent. So evidence-based management basically means a set of practices that affect how we make decisions in organizations. And simply put, it's about more systematic use of information of different kinds in the making of decisions. So, Laurent, you began our conversation with talking about rationality. And I made the point most of us are irrational or non-rational, even though we think we are. A way in which we can move closer to a standard of rationality is to pay more attention to the information we use in making our decisions. So the decision is kind of the focus of evidence-based management. And evidence movements throughout the world, from evidence-based medicine and evidence-based policing and evidence-based public health and management, all identify four sources of evidence. There could be others, but these four are sort of the base. The first is scientific evidence, and this could be evidence in criminology. It's the issue of what kind of judicial processes might keep somebody from reoffending or even needing to be in the prison system. So ways of diverting people who are charged with a crime to other programs so that in effect they may not offend again. In medicine, of course, I was once sick in Paris and I wound up at the Hotel Dieu. And I could tell from my experience in the United States that in this hospital in the center of Paris, they were applying evidence-based medicine. They did all the things they should have done for a person my age who came in with a cough and this and that and the other. I had the chest x-ray, I had this test and that, and they gave me a script to take to the Green Cross pharmacy and get my prescription. I will also say, for the least amount of money I've ever paid in my life for medical care, thank you, France. But everything that was done was by the protocol of evidence-based treatment for a patient who came in with my symptoms. So we have good evidence that from science and practice that following protocol where you use multiple sources of evidence rather than one, and you evaluate the trustworthiness of these types of evidence, ultimately your decision will be better. And we don't do this for every decision, but we certainly do it for the important ones. The four sources of evidence in medicine and in management and in criminology are scientific evidence, contextual, or in our case, organizational data, practitioner judgment, what do expert practitioners think is appropriate, and the last, stakeholder evidence. What does the public care about? What does the patient and the family care about? But science, organizational data, practitioner expertise, and stakeholder evidence are the four sources. You can learn relatively quickly not to go with your first choice in making a decision, not to be impulsive, but to say, okay, is this a decision that in our organization we have some information on what are the likely consequences of doing this? Is this a decision people here have some experience and expertise in who've been successful at it. What do they believe is appropriate? What are the families, are our clients, are our employees concerned about in this decision? And then the last issue is, does the science tell us something about how to make a certain kind of decision? The critical aspect of being an evidence-based manager is not that you go looking for evidence when you need to make a decision. It's that you've prepared yourself, like the doctor at the Hotel Dieu who treated me. He didn't go look anything up. He was trained. He knew how to diagnose the situation. And so the notion that we train managers, let's say, who are making marketing decisions, they know the marketing research about particular kinds of appeals to a clientele. They know how to analyze their organizational data about the market in order to have a sense of where the likely difficulties are, but where the opportunities are. They have people around them who have been successful as marketing people, and they can ask their valuable opinion. And then they also have a sense of what their stakeholders, both their customers and maybe internal parts of the organization who have worked this problem before, what their information might be. Other things being equal, using multiple sources of evidence increases the odds the decision will be successful. Our goal in evidence-based management is to keep people from going with their first choice, which is based often on habit or memory, but creating a space so people reflect on, okay, what do I know about this decision I'm trying to make? What has the science said, the marketing research said about this problem? What's our historical organizational data told us about this issue, the experts, the stakeholders? And even if you spent 5 minutes doing that, rather than going with your first idea, odds are good the outcome on average will be better. Because by pausing and reflecting on the kinds of evidence you have, people generate more options for themselves. They go with not one alternative, but multiple alternatives. And the research evidence says that if you consider more than one alternative, just more than one, the odds of decision success will be better because you've paused and reflected. So I think of evidence-based management as a more reflective way of being a manager, availing yourself from memory or from the sources you have before you on what's the information I have about the problem I'm trying to solve? What's the information I have about possible solutions? And then going from that information to picking the best, clearest definition of the problem and the best solution. That pause improves the decision quality. And if you put trustworthy evidence into that pause, that reflection, quality goes up. We're not talking about perfection here. We're not talking about every decision will be just right because there's too much that's already random, too many elements of chance and complexity. But the perfect is the enemy of the good. We want to make decisions better.
Yes, thank you. So, the rationality on decision can be found with multiple sources
Yes.
and time. So we need time.
Two. Yeah, and time can be 5 minutes. It can be 5 days. It could be a year. I don't know that it matters as long as there's a pause. What I do know is the rapid response to decision making in complicated circumstances is not a good formula for good outcomes when better outcomes are available.